It was years before I learned to call this prayer. The right-hand corner of a page turned down to make another page. I attempted to escape, then returned to the boneyard where I'd removed an earring from my wife's right ear. Diamond, the crux of the universe contracting to leave a pin-size hole midair. In that margin, my words remain transfixed until she disappears, proof that while I swore the world I'd created would double like a hand beneath my own, it merely stretches before me in consolation. They're there. So I'm really happy to be here. I've never read in Ottawa before, so it's a real honor. And I'd like to thank the tree coordinators, right off the bat, Margaret, Colin, and particularly Deanna, who's putting me up. So thank you very much, guys. I'm going to read primarily from my new book, Dog Ear, that was published a few months back by Vacule Press, and I'm going to continue with a poem called Evel Knievel Negotiates the Fountain at Caesar's Palace. And the title is pretty self-explanatory. It was a 1969 jump. It was a failed jump, and he went into a coma for 2 months afterwards. It's a glossa, and it glosses 4 lines from a Roddy Lumsden poem called Hard Work. So I'm going to read those lines, and then you'll hear them in the poem. So this is from Roddy Lumsden. Heard myself speak fluently in my own language. Have heard myself too described as hard work, as hard to get through as Scotch broth, though once someone rather bladdered told me I was magnetic. Behold my face at a quarter turn, dog-eared, dragonly, a carnal mask mirroring half-lit spits of wood. This morning Nevada furrows, my shoulders too warm for leather, yet I've no better armor against the wind, the stagey palms that threaten to bend and replace my stationary ramps, Caesar's fountain. Downrange, I prepare to be bandaged, hear myself speak fluently in my own language, bridge the strips around my bicep. It's where I, not like that, grip the razor down hilt. There, push, shit, it won't. I turn my gaze towards the melee that surrounds my bike, making's landfill a network of forgotten jumps, a backwards glance before a maelstrom of sand. Derelict, I've seen how closely my muse lurks, have heard myself described as hard work, having the face of an eagle, lion, and ox, tricked out in off-white chaps, cape, the valley of the shadow of death. I gauge the line from rubber to ramp, uncamp its frame, undoubled wings. Fountainside, Romans balance, flock to witness, my ramshackle horse couple with sky. Behold my stance, my corrugated flanks that rake the air, its absence as hard to get through as Scotch broth, though once I groped around and found myself unmoored at latitude. What mechanics hold me, having already landed? What patience, body tossed ass first over the gas tank's hive? The desert revives as if in dream, my head a brick, a helmeted weather vane unraveling in every plane at once. Lo, it's clear to me that this is paradise, and if given a mic, someone rather bladdered will tell me that I'm magnetic. So I'm not much for prefacing my poetry usually, so I apologize in advance. What Evel Knievel could have used in that jump was a parachute, probably. So this is a poem called Parachute. Packed, it rests its wings like a vampire bat, a cape branded by scaffolding that mimics its spine. At 10 and 2, the heavens open, judge deferring to executioner, shrapnel reassembled bearing the inscription, "Keep calm and continue to sin." How close can one be brought to the ground without touching? Pull the cord and suffer each vertebrae's dislocation, the big bang of a second skin. So there's a few ekphrastic poems in this book, and in fact, it's something new to me. It's something I never thought I would do, but I was inspired by a few pieces of art, so inspired that I felt compelled to write about them. One of them is George Seurat's famous pointillist painting, Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. So all you need to know and understand this poem is that Seurat is the speaker, and he's looking back at the fading colors in his painting 100 years after he painted it. Some days, bathers. Others, an endless stream of bodies gathered like waves veiled from the sun for a century. Still, the color's not right. Mercury welling in the vermilion that spots a dress draws a monkey from the afternoon shade. To look upon this world is to hold a note long enough to still the sien. Hesitate until I'm one with the crowd where you careen like overlapping points of light. At dusk, I find you admiring sails that emerge in the east, address you in the presence of a cornetist. Mademoiselle, allow me to hold your parasol while you dab paint against my lips. Like this. No, like this. So, as Deanna mentioned when she introduced me, I recently published The Essential Earl Burney with Porcupine's Quill, and I'd like to take a break in the middle of my reading here to read what is actually my favorite Earl Burney poem, a poem called Bushed, about a lone trapper kind of going insane on a mountainside. So this is Bushed. He invented a rainbow, but lightning struck it, shattered it into the lake lap of a mountain so big his mind slowed when he looked at it. Yet he built a shack on the shore, learned to roast porcupine belly, and wore the quills on his hatband. At first, he was out with the dawn, whether it yellowed bright as wood columbine or was only a fuzzed moth in a flannel of storm. But he found the mountain was clearly alive, sent messages whizzing down every hot morning, boomed proclamations at noon, and spread out a white guard of goat before falling asleep on its feet at sundown. When he tried his eyes in the lake, ospreys would fall like vulcries choosing the cutthroat. He took then to waiting till the night smoke rose from the boil of the sunset. But the moon carved unknown totems out of the lake shore. Owls in the bare dusky woods derided him. Moose-horned cedars circled his swamps and tossed their antlers up to the stars. Then he knew, though the mountains slept, the winds were shaping its peak to an arrowhead poised. And now he could only bar himself in and wait for the great flint to come singing into his heart. So that's Earl Burney. Okay, another one of my own. This is called Heavy is the Head That Wears the Crown. The ocean's shield foreclosing, you called from a payphone that hissed when it spoke. Gone are the days in Sackville Park, Turing statue replaced with goodwill. I walked up, bowed, and bit into his apple, spat at onlookers while I chewed aloud. Remember the cipher we misread, holding its message between us like barbed wire. We thought ourselves kings, the fire necessary to extinguish code that said, It's impossible to wear the crown without the bullet that follows entering the head. So two more. This next poem, simply titled Freedom, is a poem I wrote in Manitoba during the floods a few years back. It's where my wife's from, and we were stuck there during the flooding. Freedom. Returning to the wall mounted to restrain its applause, the Cinnabon holds my reflection as if it holds a sheet of glass. Lips paused, face lined by gables that tower overhead like a crown. My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will, penned William James prior to having his face cast in wax. The mask, a mantle preserving the strain of its maker, remains a constant, hardened thing. The river, too, has hardened, each wave refusing the intrusion of surrounding trees and the juddering pathway of the bridge. Though lit by more than one source of light, my presence is hardly sure upon it. Neither are the red and blue triangles of canvas moving away like l'inconnu de la Sienne, free to change direction with the wind, and in the wind change color with the sky. Looking up, my reflection remains as my field of vision expands, having jumped and passed unnoticed into the flood that threatens the strand. The last poem I'll do is a Toronto-based poem. It's a poem called Epoch, and it's geographically centered in Queen's Park. So I don't know if any of you know Queen's Park in Toronto, but there's a very large statue of Edward VII that was donated by the government of India, actually, in the 1800s. And one day I was walking by and the statue had been vandalized. Someone had come and painted the horse's scrotum gold. So that was the starting point for this poem, and it's actually a poem that sort of looks back over my life in the city. So this is Epoch. Forming and reforming, the sun seems to urge Edward VII into motion. Arms slack, horse reared to match the parabola of its hooves. Lit by proxy, I place my index finger in line with a bronze leg. Hold still enough to see clouds break into smaller clouds. Shroud Cerberus patrolling the Queen's gates. Let us descend into the blind world, or at least a muted reproduction where I dig a penknife into the horse's hide, as sure as if Degas had gouged the line himself. I'm not the first to autograph this monument. Earlier, its scrotum was painted gold, a second sun rising as weight decreased counter to its spine. When protracted, this measurement is a match for the mural that backs our loft. Vermilion, veined with sulfur, paint affixed like blood that's lingered too long in an inverted head. Before tidewater calved and bore spring's leftover advance, its fresco of fallen branches, it was a neighborhood girl who fell the length of brick and paint to land below our second-story window. I was there when she took to sky, dove with arms outstretched from the middle of the sun. Later, we learned her flight a push, were witness to the vandal who arrived to append wings to the remains of her outline, chalk feathered where her fingers spread 26 floors, jeans hugging her thighs like a second skin. Skin, a parchment, forming and reforming, gold, the color you'd paint your face before we'd move backwards through our days, settle into lives unmenaced by the grin cut into the dead girl's mouth. Morning glory, then, lamps lit to clarify shapes that came before, each lover a knot, a synapse doubled back and trapped inside the brain pan's conch. You're one among a collection of shells in the park where we light joints and toss them, filterless, into Edward VII's crotch, paint peeling back like waves returning to the Holocene. Teeming with the thrill of a wound, we cheer, reverie's fog possessed of an audible hunger as crows wheel overhead. Like a sheet we've loitered beneath with notions of rest, the sky is suddenly dark. Sulfur lamps diffuse before steel can stoop to illuminate new men crafting new manners of love. Thanks a lot.